Now, as we return to our lead story this morning, the ANC says that it is still studying yesterday's Constitutional Court ruling to sentence the party's former president, Jacob Zuma, to 15 months in jail for being in contempt of court after he failed to appear and participate at the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. In a statement, the ruling party has also called on its supporters and members to remain calm. The judgment emphasized that Zuma was no ordinary litigant, but as the former president of the country, he continued to wield significant political influence and that his actions could be seen as inciting others to similarly defy court orders. Yesterday's judgment could have an impact on the country's political discourse. And to help us unpack this in the political sense and political consequences, we're joined by political analyst Aubrey Matshiqi. Thokoza Koko, thanks for speaking to us.
Thokoza.
So first off, let me just get your immediate reaction to the judgment.
Well, Sakina, I have some problems with the Commission, the former president, and the Constitutional Court. The Commission, as the judgment says, should have much earlier referred the matter to the NPA, and so that the matter is dealt with at that point. But it misdirects itself in two ways. Firstly, by not doing that, and secondly, by taking the matter to the Constitutional Court. And in effect, what happens is that opens the door for the Constitutional Court, which should know better, to misdirect itself. Because in effect, what we have now is the court of last instance, the Constitutional Court, sentencing him to 15 months in jail when he has no right to appeal. Now, the Constitutional Court, in its judgment, argues that Mr. Zuma was given a chance to make representations to the court. That is not good enough because the court shifts what is its responsibility, the responsibility to protect the right of the citizen to appeal a court judgment to the citizen. And therefore, that's not good enough. And therefore, for the reasons I've stated, the court misdirects itself. Furthermore, parts of the judgment use language that I find both intemperate and unjudicial. Thirdly, the court says that we are all equal before the law. And if the court genuinely believes this, the question of the status and position, former and current, of Mr. Zuma should not arise when it considers the content of his judgment. When you look at the intemperate nature and tone of the judgment, it seems that the court enjoins itself to the lowest common denominator. And the lowest common denominator here, for me, is twofold. First of all, you have those who are uncritical in their joy that Mr. Zuma is going to jail. And then you have those who are uncritical in their defense of a Mr. Zuma who should be criticized for some of the actions he has taken and for some of the statements he has taken. And when I come to Mr. Zuma himself, my problem is that in effect, Mr. Zuma has argued that our courts, our judiciary, have enjoined themselves to a conspiracy against him, political or otherwise. And nothing substantive, nothing concrete has been offered by him as evidence he accuses in support of this allegation.
So quite a bit to wade through there. And these are, of course, questions that were ventilated before the judgment and, of course, continue to be asked. Just with regard to criticism of the Constitutional Court and the judiciary by extension. Let's talk to that because it would seem in terms of the language that you speak about used in the judgment that the court was very scathing about the former president's conduct towards it and the judiciary by extension.
Well, to say the court was scathing, frankly, is to be too kind to the court. The court was intemperate in the tone of the language it uses and in some of the language itself it uses. And the court behaves like an individual whose feelings have been hurt by the statements Mr. Zuma has been making. That is not good enough, Sakina.
So in that regard, a question that was raised first, and this is where the divergence happens between the minority and the main judgments in terms of this court being the court of first instance, yet again, in dealing with the rights of Mr. Zuma. But, let's talk to that, reflect on that for a minute. But I want to look at the implications of where this leads us to, because it is the apex court. There is no recourse beyond this court. So is there anything that the former president would use in this regard, could use to perhaps, even though it may not be in a court of law, but politically leverage on?
Well, first of all, Sakina, I cannot imagine in a legal sense any options that are now available to Mr. Zuma. So legally, the door has been shut. Politically, we can argue differently. But before I come to the political implications, let me say this about the minority judgment. I personally am more in agreement with the reasoning of the minority judgment than I am with the reasoning of the main judgment. The minority judgment, yes, does agree with the main judgment that Mr. Zuma is wrong and is in contempt. I am not even going to argue about the sentence itself. I will limit myself to the reasoning of the two judgments. I believe that the minority judgment is fundamentally correct in asserting that effectively what the main judgment does is unconstitutional because it takes away the right of Mr. Zuma to appeal. We can invoke the idea of the rule of law all we like. Such conduct on the part of the Constitutional Court impugns the idea and reality of the rule of law because it should be a given that between Mr. Zuma and the Constitutional Court, the party that must bear the primary responsibility of protecting the right to liberty of a citizen by not impugning it, by denying him the right to appeal through a process that departs from a known practice. By doing that, I think the Concord has impugned the right that it argues it seeks, the rule of law that it argues it seeks to defend. Now, politically, I think that there is much more we should be worried about than just the implications of this single judgment. Because I have been arguing, Sakina, that there are four storms that are coming towards South Africa. You have the storm that is coming out of Nkandla. You have the storm that is coming out of conflict in the ANC. You have the storm that is coming out of conflict in the Zulu Royal House. You have the storm that is going to happen because of the hunger of our people, which in part is caused by the mishandling by the ruling party and its government of the COVID-19 crisis. Now, what I fear is that these four storms at some point may become a single perfect storm. And that perfect storm may impose on the country social, political, and economic instability. But before that happens, there are two storms which worry me. There is the possibility of a convergence between the conflict that may occur because of the fact that Zuma is going to jail and the conflict that may occur because of what is going on inside the ANC. The two at some point are going to converge, coalesce, and feed into each other, causing on their own version of the social, political, and economic instability I'm talking about. But these storms are avoidable, Sakina. They are not inevitable. Different actors, including the protagonists in these matters, must exercise their free will in a manner that foregrounds the national interests, in a manner that foregrounds stability in the country, because if they don't, then they are going to unleash forces on the country that impose a climate of, as I said, social, political, and economic instability.
Aubrey, I'm going to have to ask you, if possible, if you could please stay with us. We have to, unfortunately, at this point, say goodbye to our viewers on SABC2, but we still have another hour of Morning Live to run on SABC News, where we will continue this conversation after the news, in conversation with Aubrey Matshiqi. And I actually want to pick up on the point where Aubrey talks about the protagonists and how these storms are avoidable, and pick up on that point with what has been said so far. Edward Zuma, for example, the son of former President Jacob Zuma, saying he will lay down his life for his father before anyone takes him to prison. We'll actually play that for you when we come back to this conversation with Aubrey Matshiqi, as we continue to take political analysis on yesterday's landmark judgment against former President Jacob Zuma, sentencing him to 15 months imprisonment, and he has to hand himself over within 5 calendar days to start serving that sentence, failing which the law enforcement authorities then need to step in, and they will have 3 days to effect that arrest and have the former president start serving his sentence. So all of that still to play out, discussing what some of the possible political ramifications are with Aubrey Matshiqi. Apologies to our SABC2 viewers that we have to cut you out of that conversation at this point, but thanks for being with us this morning. Do take care. We'll see you again bright and early tomorrow morning. And coming up, the third and final hour of Morning Live on SABC News. SABC2 viewers, take care.